All right, hello and welcome to the Ask Me Anything for the CrossFit Linchpin private Facebook group that we do every Thursday. Top questions are going to get, the ones that get the most upvoted will get answered. And I've got some notes today. I've got, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 6 handwritten pages of stuff that I want to cover. So we're going to go down some rabbit holes, but it's going to be good. We're going to cover some of the top questions that obviously were upvoted, but then there's a few that got a nice little number of upvotes, but I'm going to cover them anyway because I think the value is there, and they involve programming. They involve questions about push-pull versus lower body, push-pull, lower body versus some weightlifting splits, as well as thoughts on periodization, as well as strength and skill cycles, if you will. Great questions, useful knowledge for everyone to have and understand why we do what we do and why we don't do what we don't do. And hopefully this video on our YouTube channel and podcast can then therefore kind of live as a reference material. So let's go ahead and dive right in. First and foremost, the number one most upvoted question was from Chris L. Who are your top 3 people to talk programming with? Fantastic question. So I'm going to give you 4. People I talk to quite regularly are all these people on the list. Chris Spieler, known for a very long time, has an excellent head on his shoulders when it comes to programming. Classic programmer, understands it, and he and I will bounce things off each other regularly. Dan Bailey is somebody that I chat with regularly as well, and just once again just run things by him, thinking about doing this, what do you think about this, and he'll do the same, and there's always a good conversation there. Those 2 names may or may not surprise people. I don't think they'll surprise folks. Here are my next 2. Adrian Bosman. Adrian Bosman is one of the smartest people in the entire CrossFit community, ecosystem, whatever you want to say. I think the guy's a borderline genius, and I just don't throw those terms out haphazardly. He does not get the credit that he deserves. He is as sharp and as knowledgeable as they come on a breathtaking range of subjects. And so Adrian and I speak regularly. And then lastly, Joe Westerlin. And I don't know if a lot of folks know who Joe is. He's out in Omaha, Nebraska. He ran CrossFit Omaha for a large number of years. He's trained athletes. He's on the CrossFit training staff. He's a flow master, and he's just understated, but has a ton of knowledge. Came from a strength and conditioning background before joining the ranks of CrossFit. Just a top-notch individual to run things by. So those are my top 4 that I go to, and they're all a wealth of knowledge, and I enjoy talking to them regularly. So Chris, hope that helps. Next most upvoted question was from Nick B. Let me read it here. Do you believe deep tissue massage would be a good maintenance practice to incorporate into our lives in order to facilitate muscle recovery, blood flow, etc.? Or do you think it's really not all it's cracked up to be unless medically necessary? If not massage, is there anything else in this area you'd recommend outside of stretching? I think deep tissue massage certainly has its place, and if your wallet can cover it, or your insurance does or whatnot, getting in for that sort of work, I personally find it wonderful and very beneficial. I have found it, for me personally, so please don't take this as an absolute truth, I have found it more beneficial to aid in recovery than necessarily to do some things which I think some people think it will yield, such as an improved range of motion. Like for myself, I've got terrible shoulders and overhead position, and they'll get in there and work those pesky muscles and break through some scar tissue and do all that kind of good stuff, and I usually would walk out in the moment with an increased range of motion due to the fact that I've just had somebody giving unbelievable, intense personal attention to a specific area for 45 minutes or an hour. At the next morning or two when I wake up, it's just back to where it was. But if you've got aches, pains, pesky knots somewhere in your body that you can't seem to get out, I personally have had success with it, and I think it works well. Outside of that, I won't drop the name brand here, but maybe potentially we can chat offline about it. But I do happen to have one of those, stretching, massage, reciprocating guns, to loosen up tissue and whatnot. I was lucky enough to come into one, and I do use that regularly after workouts. And for some of the bumps and bruises that I've put my body through with motorcycle wrecks in the military, and breaking my pelvis and et cetera, there's some areas that I just can't seem to foam roll or lacrosse ball my way, or banded distraction, or whatever you want to do into making it feeling better and loosening up a little bit. And that kind of a percussion gun does seem to work well, but they are spendy. Okay, so it's just one of those deals. The almighty dollar comes down to a lot. Like I said, I was lucky enough to come into one. And that was just very lucky and fortunate on my side. I also know a lot of people are involved in the yoga community and give it high remarks, and so I wouldn't be adverse to going down that road as well. So let's see, did I miss anything for that, Nick? No, I think that's what I got there. Okay, all right. Next question. Most upvoted. I'm just going by what's most upvoted here. From John W. What's on your Christmas wish list? Not much. This actually drives my wife insane. She says I'm terribly hard to buy things for, whether it's my birthday or Christmas or whatnot. I just don't want anything, and I don't know where that comes from. I think it's just naturally how I'm wired. I don't know. I don't even know what people want. I don't want any electronics. I don't want a watch. I've got my iPhone, works fine. I don't need the newest iPhone. I just don't want anything. I don't know. And so it drives her absolutely bonkers. And so what is, she of course said I have to give her something. So what is on my Christmas wish list is I sent her 6 book titles of the next 6 books that I would like to read. So for Christmas, I believe I'm getting 6 books, 6 nonfiction books. So I'm a relatively boring individual when it comes to gifts, but that's directly in line with my interests. I want to make myself better and improve myself, and therefore I can serve others better. And immersing myself in some of these nonfiction books I find is useful for that. So that's that. Okay, now we're getting into the meat and potatoes here, if you will. Okay, first question is from Anne, and I'll read it verbatim from her. When or have decided what movement you want for each day, for example, below parallel, pulling from the ground, etc., how do you decide if you're going to do it as intervals, an AMRAP, or rounds for time? Okay, good question. So this is saying that we've already, again, know what we want to do on that particular day. Pull from the ground, go overhead, etc., etc. So here's what I'll say in general. Most of those, you've given me a few options. Is it going to be rounds for time, AMRAP, or interval? Most of the time, it's going to be rounds for time. So rounds for time in programming lingo is known as a task priority workout. And that means that the task is set. So for example, Fran is a task priority workout. 21:15:9, rounds for time, thrusters and pull-ups. That's the work. Force in the distance is the work. How long will that take is the unknown component. So when it's for time, the time is set. The task is set. It's a task priority workout. The time is unknown. Most of the workouts I will make as task priority workouts, meaning for time. And that's just because I feel it is a better preparation not only for your GPP, your general physical preparedness, but for what you're going to face in life as well. meaning the work, it ain't over until you do every last rep. Period, end of story. You can't escape until the work is done. You have to stay until the job is done. Now, on the other side, that you can't escape. On the other side, you've got an AMRAP, which we put in every now and then. They're wonderful. People love them. So for an AMRAP, the time is set and the amount of work that you will accomplish is the unknown factor. So in an AMRAP, as many rounds or reps as possible in a set amount of time. For example, let's say 20 minutes. So a classic CrossFit AMRAP is Cindy. AMRAP 20 minutes, 5 pull-ups, 10 push-ups, 15 air squats. That's considered one round. And you're going to do as many rounds as you can in that set period of time. So once again, the time is set, 20 minutes. How many of those rounds of pull-ups, push-ups, and squats will you get? That's the unknown factor. So the amount of work is undetermined. And again, AMRAPs are fantastic, one of the many tools in our toolbox, and we put them in every now and then. And I'm not saying that anyone would do this, but with an AMRAP, whether it's a 7-minute AMRAP, 5-minute AMRAP, 15-minute AMRAP, 20-minute AMRAP, whether you work hard or whether you just kind of skate and sandbag and cruise, no matter what, when that clock hits a certain minute, you're done, whether you pushed it or you didn't push it. So there's kind of an escape, you know what I mean? You're only in this, you're only committed for a certain period of time. And again, they're wonderful and they have value, but I'm a fan, if I had to choose only one or the other, which luckily I do not have to choose that, but only one or the other, the task priority workout, the 4-time workout. You've got to do the work. Period, end of story. And so most of the stuff that we do will be that. Now, intervals are fantastic. And intervals, in general, we try to put in there once a week. And they're extremely beneficial. They give you a wonderful opportunity to express intensity, and they can make sure that you're not neglecting a certain shorter time domain, because it can be really easy to make a lot of workouts that fall in the 7 to 15 minute time domain, which is an excellent time domain to spend a lot of your life in. But you want to make sure that you're hitting the longer stuff. You want to make sure that you're hitting the shorter stuff. And so when you have an intention to program some intervals, it kind of lends itself well to make sure that you're hitting that sub 5, sub 4, sub 3, sub 2 minute kind of a time domain. So, when the week's laid out, in general, most of them will start off as 4-time workouts, task priority workouts. And then I'll look at the week and see, first of all, I'll look for which of these workouts might play well as an interval. And I'll put some time and thought into that and look at each one. And there will usually be one or more that would play very well as an interval. And they may play very well just with a simple modification, like maybe it was a 5 rounds for time workout at the beginning of its life. And just upon further inspection, I could easily make it, instead of 5 rounds for time, 5 intervals for time with a set period of rest between each interval. And it was just that simple. Doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes it has the potential to be a good interval workout, but something has to change, or the order isn't quite right, or what it ends on won't give you the opportunity to finish strong, and bring that intensity. And so how the interval plays out with regards to loading and movement, rep range, etc., is a very large factor as to will that be a successful interval. Because if we're making intervals, we want to make sure that we're not hitting the athlete in a way that just bogs them down or slows them down, that they can express that relative intensity, relative to their physical and psychological tolerances. So yeah, usually the week gets laid out, most become task priority, then I see what will work well as an interval, figure that out, and then every now and then we'll make sure we throw in an AMRAP so that everyone goes, yay, an AMRAP! And that's kind of, what we'll do there. Okay, so now starting to get into some good rabbit hole area, if you will. Okay, first one from Boz W. Can you talk the pros and cons of push/pull lower versus weightlifting splits. So, yes, didn't get a tremendous amount of upvotes, but Boz, we're going to go ahead and knock it out here. So, okay, let me make sure I don't miss anything. I want to, like I said, make this a good reference piece that folks can get behind. So, okay, pros and cons. So let's kind of just first of all define our terms in case anyone's not quite sure what we're talking about. The push, pull, slash, lower, these are ways to divide the way that you train, to divide the way that you program based upon what people would say are some body movement patterns, okay? Pushing, pulling, and then lower extremities. So pulling movements are generally associated with the posterior side of your body, the back half of your body, your back. The pushing movements in general are associated with the anterior side of your body, or the front, if you will. And then, not all the time, but frequently, are quite often associated with the pulling day as well, which would be the posterior side, the back side. So some people will break up programming and what you're going to lift and what you're going to do based upon pushing movements, pulling movements, and lower body movements. And like I said, a lot of times lower often gets lumped in with pulling. That's the push, pull, lower. Now, the other thing he mentioned was splits. And splits can be done lumping a couple things into each day or a singular thing on each day. Probably one of the more common splits is what maybe a lot of us, I know that I did for many years before CrossFit when I was doing more traditional, which I guess you would consider bodybuilding, stuff, is, Monday and Thursday, we work chest and tris. Tuesday and Friday is back and biceps, and then Wednesday and Saturday, legs and abs. And that's just one example of a split. There are certainly others. And so you've got the push-pull lower versus the splits, and he wants to know, what are the pros and cons of each one? And a lot of this is going to come down to form versus function, okay? And a lot of the push-pull lower and the splits work very well when chasing isolation movements or aesthetics. And when we start to get into multi-joint movements and athleticism and general physical preparedness, this isn't ideally the best way to train athletes. So this has is more common, has much more utility in your classic style of bodybuilding, where we're talking about hypertrophy, aesthetics, things of that nature. Better suited for isolation movements compared to multi-joint movements. And training GPP or general physical fitness requires training the body as one piece, because that's how life demands that we use it. So if you're going to train a push, a pull, or a lower, or I'm just going to do my chest and tris on this day, my back and bis on another day, what happens when you work in a multi-joint movement such as a squat, clean, and jerk? Well, now we're pulling from the ground. We're receiving it below parallel. We're standing it up with a squat. And now we're going overhead and we're pressing, and we're using the front, our posterior and our anterior, and every conceivable muscle group from head to toe is involved in that compound multi-joint movement. It doesn't lend itself well to that classic splits routine or push-pull lower sort of routine. It's a huge grenade and curveball that messes that up. And we do countless movements that fall into that category of blurring all the lines. And, when you can segment the body, because maybe you're doing more isolation work or bodybuilding style training, that's fine. It's actually quite effective for that. But that's not what we're doing when we're chasing GPP and general physical preparedness, fitness, being ready and capable for everything, and training our body in the way that life will demand that we use it. That's not isolation training. That's not segmented training. One of the things we used to say all the time at the CrossFit Level 1 seminars was that segmented training leads to segmented capacity, and that's certainly not what we want in the real world. And you can't leg extension, leg curl, abduction, adduction, and leg press your way into matching the head to toe total systemic, total recruitment musculature required for the back squat. You just cannot do it. You have to do that compound multi-joint head to toe movement that recruits and requires everything that you have. And the same for the clean and jerk, the thruster, the snatch, you name it. And so we live in this multi-plane, multi-joint compound world when we're chasing constantly varied functional moves at high intensity, when we're chasing CrossFit. And so some of the traditional models more in line with segmented training or isolation movements or bodybuilding style training don't translate well over there, and that's why most effective CrossFit programs aren't going to follow that model as well. Now, that is not to say that all isolation movements are bad and have no value, and hopefully that's not how this is taken in any way, shape, or form. But some things you get a whole lot more bang for your buck out of, and those are the ones that we embrace. And so, for example, sorry, I gotta keep the caffeine going after just sleeping so poorly last night. So no, not all isolation movements are bad and without value, absolutely not. But if they're the main focus of your training, you're not training for general physical preparedness. You're not training for well-rounded fitness, because that is not how the body operates in the real world. So just if you gave me a blueprint of what your training looks like every day, I can tell you what you're going towards. Now, for example, here's an example of an isolation movement having value, right? And we do some isolation movements in our accessory work, and that's an area where they fit well, as a side dish. It should not be your main dish. So let's say, for example, we may use an isolation movement because we believe it may benefit our functional movement, our multi-joint movement, our compound movement. So maybe you've got a weak overhead press, whether it's a push press or a jerk, whatever it happens to be, handstand push-ups, and you're building up your shoulders, things of that nature, and you just happen to identify accurately that, relative to everything else, it appears that I have weak triceps, which are critical in pressing. And so maybe some isolation work specifically targeted to improve your tricep strength is beneficial, with the end state of not becoming stronger at a dumbbell kickback or pulley push downs. We're not, skull crushers. But the benefit being, I'm specifically embracing this isolation movement, this single joint movement, because it's going to help my functional movement, my compound multi-joint movement. That is a great use of it, and that's why we find some things like that in our accessory work. Okay, next question. This is from Ryan H, and it involves periodization. Okay, Ryan H, what are your thoughts or philosophy on periodization, i.e. strength and skill cycles, etc.? Okay, here we go. Let's dive right in. I'm going to take another sip of my caffeine. All right. So once again, starting with this, I think it's beneficial to identify some terms so that everyone's kind of on the same sheet of music. There are multiple definitions, but here's just a general one to get it. When we talk about periodization in general, we're talking about structuring various cycles of training, generally over a longer period of time, with the goal of hopefully increasing performance. And traditionally speaking, this would be done to line up perfectly with a competition, for example, okay? You want to peak on a certain day because that's when the big competition is. And I've laid out my year's training so that on August 7th, everything falls into place. And things which will be taken into account will be volume of work in periodization, intensity, any particular training focuses that might need to be priorities, And all these things will be thought of ideally in the light of preventing overtraining and also not overtaxing the athlete while at the same time making gains and improving. Now, in general, in my opinion, periodization, it's far more beneficial to the competitive, the serious competitive CrossFit athlete who needs to peak a couple times a year, maybe 3 times a year, compared to the general population, the rest of us regular folks. You know, if you're putting food on the table and paying your mortgage because you are a competitive CrossFit athlete and you've got sponsors and you earn prize money and you need to make sure that when the Open comes around, you are ready to crush it. And then when a sanctioned event comes around, you need to peak right then. And then if your performance in the Open or a sanctioned event was good enough and you're going to go to the games, then you need to make sure that you're peaking once again there. And so you have these definite points in the calendar that are known variables. And since they are known, this specific date, this specific week, then you can then backtrack and rearrange things to make sure that when that day or week comes, that you're not, tired because you just put yourself through the meat grinder for the last 10 days, but quite the opposite. You have lined yourself up to peak and you've tapered in a certain way that when that competition rolls around, you're ready to put your best foot forward. That is not the world that most of us live in. Most people watching this video are not putting food on their table because they're such a high-level competitive CrossFit athlete that that's what they do for a living. Most of us are regular people with jobs, kids, lives, responsibilities, and our goal is to maintain a wonderful high level of health and physical fitness, injury-free, pain-free, so that we can live as long of a productive life as possible and feel good all the time and not be overtrained and not live in the gym 2 to 3 hours a day, etc., etc. So let's see. And I say that because if we're talking about regular people, like I said, the periodization works really well if you are a competitive athlete and have some dates to hit during the year. But for the regular population, when do you need to peak? Well, first of all, never, and the second answer is you don't know when, right? I mean, if you are living in New England, which is where my family's from, when's the big snowstorm going to hit that there's 2 feet of heavy, wet snow on the ground? And that's the day you need to get out there with a shovel and do 2 hours of miserable shoveling. How do you know when that day is going to be that you're going to need that physical capacity? You have absolutely no idea. You can't plan for that. Last year, now living in the state of Washington, we had a massive, huge tree fall in our backyard. Did not know that a windstorm was going to come through that day. This thing almost hit our house, which would have been horrific. But the next 2 or 3 days was spent with a neighbor and a chainsaw just cutting this massive tree up and just back-breaking labor of picking up these huge pieces, putting them in wheelbarrows, moving them around. It was a horrifically monstrous amount of just manual labor. I didn't know that I was going to have to do that day. I wasn't ready to peak on that day. But luckily, we keep ourselves in a ready state all the time as regular citizens, as non-top tier competitive athletes that need to be ready on a certain date of the calendar. We need to be walking around all the time, ready for whatever life happens to throw at us. And so the way that we train sets us up for that success. It doesn't happen by accident. It's quite intentional that we can do that. And then the need not to peak on a certain day, when my kid's going to ask me to play soccer and sprint around with them, when am I going to have to do that? I don't know. Any day that they ask me, I need to be ready. The need not to peak should be, as if it isn't obvious enough for regular individuals, it should be profoundly obvious for anyone in a law enforcement or a first responder or a military sort of capacity. So if you're a cop, a firefighter, an EMT, a soldier, a Marine, an airman, you're in the military, you're in the Navy, whatever it happens to be, you are in a profession where you do not get to choose when the balloon goes up, when your skills are needed, when the fight for your life is going to happen, when the brawl is going to happen, when the building is going to be on fire, when you're going to have to buddy carry an injured person a half mile. You don't get to dictate those days. You don't know when you need to peak. You need to live your life in the best possible, highest state of physical readiness so that whenever that day comes up, you're ready and you just go. And that is what we do at CrossFit Linchpin. That is what we train for day in and day out. You know, we walk around at about 90%, just all the time. Most people on any workout that pops up, from a 7x1 back squat to DT to Grace to a 5K run to whatever, whether they PR or don't PR that day, they're usually about within 90% of their lifetime best. And I don't think people have an appreciation for how amazing that is. You're walking around all the time at 90% of your absolute top tier effort is insane. And then if you just happen to know that on this specific date on February 10th, I'm going to enter a powerlifting competition, and on that day, I need to make sure that my back squat peaks at 100%, okay, well then you can do that. You've got a date, and you've got one specific lift or two or three specific lifts, this small spectrum of capacity that you know you'll need on a very specific date. You can work around some incredible periodization to hit that. That's not the world that most of us live in. We live in a world of general physical preparedness, high state of readiness, improving our health and fitness every darn day. And so that's what we do. Okay, so just continuing to go down this, just so people get a little bit of an education, some terminology, etc., etc. Here's some general periodization terminology. It may change a little bit depending upon, you know, how you were classically trained or not, but you can have these various cycles, okay? So when people talk about periodization, they're usually talking about various cycles. You can have a quadrennial cycle, which means a cycle that takes into account multiple years. You can have a macro cycle, which is usually about 1 year or less. You can have a mesocycle, which is about 3 to 4 weeks, 3 to 4 week block of training. A microcycle, which is about 1 week of training. And then of course you have your individual workouts. And then even you have various models of periodization, from traditional models to an undulating model to a block model. All have the pros, all have the cons. But like I said, a lot of them are linked back to what I was mentioning a second ago, versus competitors preparing for a certain date, having some very specific data points known that you're going to hinge the rest of your training around, because on this date, on this time, these 1 or 2 particular lifts are needed, or I'm going to run a 5K, or whatever it is. It's this very specific thing. So, you know, at Linchpin, I program in 4-week blocks, and that's just how I phrase it. I program in 4-week blocks because that's true. I lay out the 4-week blocks. Then after I lay out some major building blocks in there, then I start to piece together the individual weeks in general. And then after I piece out the individual weeks, then I piece out the individual workouts in the week. So I guess if you wanted to, you know, categorize what I do in more of an exercise science periodization vernacular, then you could say that I program in mesocycles, okay? Because that's 3 to 4 week blocks. And then in those mesocycles, there are microcycles, which means the week-long blocks. And then, of course, there's the individual workouts inside the microcycles. And that, you know, some people really enjoy that language. And, you know, maybe we'd get some more, you know, people would get intrigued, but like, ooh, Linchpin's in a mesocycle right now. That sounds like they're doing the fancy stuff over there. Didn't know that they were in a mesocycle. Holy cow. Just means we're programming in 3 to 4 week blocks. That's all it means, you know, so it is what it is. But where did I lost my train of thought here for a second. But in each of those cycles, so to speak, right? I mean, we're never looking to peak on a single day of the year. Again, we just had this conversation. The goal of what we do is just steadily improving your conditioning, your gymnastics, by that I mean your body weight movements, as well as your weightlifting. And weightlifting doesn't mean the sport of weightlifting, which is the clean and jerk and the snatch. By weightlifting in CrossFit terms, we mean moving external objects. So that could be a medicine ball, a sandbag, a barbell. That's what we call weightlifting. So our goal is to steadily improve conditioning, gymnastics, and weightlifting all at the same time. Okay, because we're not looking to have you peak in just one of those areas on any one particular day. We're greedy. We want it all. And we don't know what life's going to demand of you. So we're going to be ready for anything on any day. So we're looking to steadily improve all of those areas, all at the same time, every month of the year, every week of every month, every day of every week. And that's accomplished by what we do every day and every week, the microcycle, if you will, the individual workout. Now, if the terms that we just mentioned from the various types of cycles, for example, if the terms provide the programmer with a useful vernacular that helps them structure what they're doing, well, then that has value, and that's fantastic. But it's been my experience that most programmers, even if they start there, will develop their own style and their own flow, and that's great, and that's a good thing. Told you we get a lot here. One more hit of caffeine. We're getting close to the light at the end of the tunnel. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that specifically training for a singular focus, such as Olympic lifting or powerlifting, is easy. Okay, so I'm not saying that if you've got an athlete and they're just a dedicated powerlifter, they know when their meet dates are. You've got a dedicated Olympic lifter whose world revolves around the clean and jerk, the snatch, and you know the calendar dates of the year that they have to perform. I'm not saying that programming for those individuals is easy. Not at all. It's profoundly challenging, incredibly challenging. So please know that, and it has all of my respect. But having a single focus, the single date, clean and jerk and snatch need to be ready. Having that kind of a singular focus and not having to worry about if other things slip off, such as your max pull-ups or your 5K run, for example, that's just a luxury that the CrossFit programmer does not have. I don't have that luxury. I got to make sure that everything is progressing forward at the same time. And our goal is to improve people's fitness. And if we're getting in CrossFit terminology here, that's your work capacity across broad time and modal domains. And you are not going to improve work capacity across broad time and modal domains, conditioning, weightlifting, and gymnastics, with a singular focus and letting other things slide. Is not going to occur. And doing this and improving somebody's fitness, work capacity across broad time modal domains, month after month, year after year, is tough. It's not impossible, but it is profoundly challenging. And luckily, I really enjoy the challenge. Because we need to balance all of the items that I mentioned, at the beginning of this talk, all the different modalities. We need to balance the volume of training, the intensity, etc., etc. All of these things need to be taken into place so that the athlete progresses and doesn't overtrain or hit a rut or plateau. It is a beautiful, complicated symphony that requires constant immersion by the programmer to successfully coordinate and pull it off. And many subtle things come into play that potentially at first glance may not be readily apparent to some folks. So let's bring some up. There's a reason that I chose the work-rest cycle that we do at Linchpin. There's a reason that we do 3 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 1 day off, so that over the course of a 7-day week, we get 5 training days and 2 full dedicated rest days. That's not by accident. That allows us, in general, in my experience, to modulate intensity very well, to keep intensity relatively high, because we're getting 2 full rest days, which are absolutely mission critical, and that helps people not get burned out, to recover properly, and to not be overtrained. There's a reason. There's a reason we do what we do. Then the daily workouts, the weekly workouts and then the daily workouts, each of those has to pay particular attention to the volume on each day, the volume in each week, how that week interplays with the next week, how that interplays with the entire month, and that volume has to be regulated. You get too much, you beat people down, you wear them down, it's no good. You don't get enough in, you're not going to get the adaptation that you want. You got to get in X amount of reps to make some good things happen. There's a reason that we don't do multiple workouts every day. And the reason that we don't do multiple workouts every day is not only they unnecessary and they kill intensity, but that's also one of the reasons why people have been doing Linchpin for years and years and are continuing to improve, because we're not beating them down, we're not overtraining them. We don't believe in the more is better mentality, because it's erroneous, because it's false. There's a reason that the accessory work is optional, because if you're not ready for it, more is not better, and your training will backslide and go in the wrong direction. But if you are ready for it, well, then it's a wonderful way to break through a plateau, get in a little bit extra volume for those athletes that can handle it. But it is completely optional, and that's a critical part. If I made the accessory work mandatory, it would deteriorate some people's fitness because it's unnecessary for them. It'd be too much. There's a reason that we respect the heavy days and we don't load other things onto those days. And there's a reason why we've got people who came from other areas where they did a heavy lift followed by a Metcon every day, thinking that that would get them stronger. And they get to Linchpin, things look a little bit different. We're going to respect the heavy days. We're not going to go heavy every day then do a Metcon, because that doesn't work well. And that's a tough pill for them to swallow eventually, but they trust the process. And then they start respecting the heavy days, pouring their heart and soul into it, doing a proper warm-up, resting 2 to 4 minutes between those lifts, then stretching and going home and really pouring everything they have into it. And guess what? They get stronger. Good things happen. Again, it's not a mistake that we do things the way that we do. There's a reason that we don't have a barbell every single day in the workouts that we do. That would just beat people down. And if you beat people down, eventually they're not going to work out anymore. Eventually they're tired, they can't maintain intensity. And if intensity is the independent variable most commonly associated with maximizing the rate of return of favorable adaptation, which is the mouthful here at the level 1, basically meaning that intensity relative to the individual is mission critical with you getting results. If your programming is putting people into a place that they're overtrained and tired, well, then their intensity is going to go down. And if their intensity goes down, the results go down, and thereby the efficacy of your program is compromised. And I certainly do not want the efficacy of Linchpin's program to be compromised, quite the opposite. So there's a reason that we have light days. There's a reason that we have just body weight days. There's a reason that we have not for time days, where once a week, so not only do we have 2 full dedicated rest days every week with 5 days of training, but then one of those 5 training days will specifically say that this is not for time. And that gives the athlete an opportunity to do beautiful, wonderful, functional movements at a moderate or a lower pace or intensity, thereby not burning them out, thereby keeping their compliance high, thereby allowing them to have more energy and intensity to bring on the other days. And then good things happen. So once again, none of this is random. None of this is haphazard. None of this happens by accident. Everything that we do and everything that we program and everything that we write has dedicated reasons and lessons learned over now what is approaching, I think, 16 years of me doing this. There's a reason that we do what we do, and there's a reason that it works so darn well. Okay, final page and all this crazy stuff that I have here. One more sip of the caffeine. We've been going for 48 minutes. I didn't realize that. Okay. So let's see. Oh, okay. Getting back to the other part of Ryan's question. One part was periodization, and the other part was strength/skill cycle. So, do most people, and I say most people, which is not high-level competitive CrossFit athletes. Those are not most people. Most people is general population. Even if you're a Navy SEAL, sorry, your general population fitness. And I say that as a former SEAL. One workout a day. Now, okay, you're going to want to get in some finning and some rucking. Okay, maybe I should have phrased that differently. I'm going to have my former community beating down my door. But point being, general population, to include police, fire, military, average citizens, do those people need a strength and skill cycle? Okay, high-level competitive athletes, absolutely, okay. But those regular population, no. Short answer, no. Now, there's more to it than that, okay? I say no, that they don't need a specific strength or skill cycle, because that implies that they've identified one thing that they don't do well, or one area. And if they bump up that one area, then life's good, right? It's like, my deadlift's a little low. I'm going to do this strength cycle. I'm going to bump my deadlift up 25 pounds, and then guess what? I'm going to be a beast. And everyone's going to ask me what I did. And I'm going to say, nobody can keep up with me anymore because my deadlift went up 25 pounds. That's the initial thought, I believe, but that's not how that plays out. And like I said, my short answer is that no, most people, general population, do not need a specific strength or skill cycle because most people need everything. So it's not that we just said, hey, you know what, you're right. You just need to bump your deadlift up and then you're going to be a well-rounded athlete because your 100-meter dash, your 200, your 400, your 800, your mile time, and your 5K time are just phenomenal. And your max calories 5 minutes on the Echo Bike are through the roof. Your conditioning is tremendous. You're right. You don't have to worry about conditioning. It's just your deadlift holding you back. Oh, and by the way, we looked at your body weight movements as well. And your strict pull-ups, I can't believe it. You've got 30 strict pull-ups. That's amazing. And your strict muscle-ups and handstand walking and strict handstand push-ups are so good. They're just top-notch. So you're right. Your conditioning is amazing. And your body weight's amazing that, you know what? You just need to do this linear progression for your deadlift. You bump that up, and then you, my friend, you're off to the races. Hopefully that didn't come off as too sarcastic. It actually was not intended to be sarcastic. It's just supposed to be illustrative of what I think a lot of people fall into the trap of this one thing's holding me back. And if I bump this one thing up, I'm good. Where truth be told, most of us in the regular population, we need to improve our conditioning and our body weight movements and our weightlifting. Got to improve it all. We need to improve in all areas, most of us. And so that means you need to improve your overall fitness, aka general physical preparedness, work capacity across broad time modal domains, CrossFit, right? And so a solid program of CrossFit will do that. It will improve all areas of fitness at the same time. Your conditioning, your body weight, and your weightlifting. And I think the problem is that most people just aren't patient. And so they think, I can do this thing for 6 or 8 weeks, problem solved, good to go. Well, the other issue is that most of what we do in CrossFit and we want to get good at in the real world is mixed modality things, right? It involves conditioning, body weight, and weightlifting. I remember a conversation I had with Spiel actually years ago. It was probably 8 years or so now. It's been longer probably than I realized. But at the time, I had a deadlift that was around 475 or 480. And I was telling Chris that I was going to really focus on my deadlift, and I was going to get to 500. I was going to put 20, 25 pounds on my deadlift, and that was going to be my big focus. And then, I mean, wouldn't that be amazing to have a 500-pound deadlift, which is just, it sounds cool. It's great on Instagram. It's wonderful bragging rights. And Chris, God bless him, asked me a question that was super annoying because it was true, and I didn't want to hear the truth. He said, okay, so let's say you do that. Okay, you focus hardcore for the next 1, 2, 3 months on your deadlift. You put 25 pounds on it, and you've got that 500-pound deadlift. He said, do you think I'm going to notice that on any day other than a 7x1 deadlift? Do you think you're going to suddenly have a faster Diane time because you put 25 pounds in your deadlift and went from 475 to 450? It's like, no, it probably won't affect my Diane. And all the other workouts that we do are mixed modality workouts, requiring you to have capacity in conditioning, body weight, and weightlifting. And so, will that probably get noticed? Not really. It's just one of the things I kind of wanted to do because I thought it sounded cool. And it probably would not have had the transference that I thought that it would have. And in my humble opinion, I think some other people have that false assumption as well, which is why my simple answer is that most people don't need a strength or skill cycle. Most people need everything. Most people need fitness. Now here's the deal. There's also need versus want. And so maybe you don't need it, okay? But maybe you want it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the wonderful thing about having freedom. If you want to do a linear strength cycle or some sort of skill progression, if you want to do that because it makes you happy, then do it. Then have a blast. We're just working out. Don't make it more than it is. Don't make it more stressful or more complicated than it is. If you don't smile and enjoy what you're doing, you're going to stop doing it eventually. So if doing a back squat cycle or a whatever in the world cycle is something you want to do and it's going to make you happy, by God, go do it. Go do it. Have a blast. Enjoy yourself. And keep doing the physical fitness, obviously. Keep doing your CrossFit, but go ahead and do a cycle if you want. Enjoy yourself. Now, there is another aspect of this, okay? Is maybe you do have a particular area, you're one of those people that does have a singular focus that appears to be lacking in relative comparison to everything else, and improvement in that one specific area through some dedicated focus, through maybe a particular strength or skill cycle, would actually be really highly beneficial to your overall physical fitness. It's kind of like when we spoke about a little while ago that maybe you do some tricep work, isolation movements, because it will help your functional movement of your overhead press. Well, we could play the same game with a strength cycle. So maybe you've identified something that is holding you back. Got to get that first strict pull-up. Back squat is actually significantly low compared to some other things that you're doing. Want to learn to get that first ring muscle up, first whatever it happens to be, then yeah, it can make a lot of sense to have some nice dedicated focus if you've really identified that's a hole in your game. And luckily, you're watching this, if you're part of the Linchpin community, you've got a Beyond the Whiteboard subscription, and as part of Beyond the Whiteboard, you've got access to their specialty programs, which I think there's over 15 of them now, and they're fantastic and expertly laid out and highly beneficial if you need them to get your first strict pull-up, ring muscle up, handstand push-up, improved deadlift capacity, jerk, back squat, you name it. So yeah, dive into one of those and they can supplement your training really well. And we've had members of Linchpin do them and post about them in the private Facebook group. They're fantastic. And if they fit your needs and you want to do it, do it. Again, that's the wonderful thing about a need versus want. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. It's 58 minutes. I can't believe we've been going almost an hour. So that's the more of a strength cycle, if you will. Now, skill work, in my mind, that's a different beast. Still getting back to Ryan's question, multi-part question. Skill practice, short answer to that, yes. Darn near everybody should do it and will benefit from it. A huge yes. And whatever that skill happens to be, doing the Bergner warm-up for the snatch, working on your ring muscle-up progression, improving your handstand capacity, just working on your air squat, keeping your feet nice and flat on the ground, knees getting pushed out, vertical torso, hip crease below the knee, good midline stability. I mean, just working the foundational movement of the air squat or working your deadlift, whatever it happens to be, that sort of skill work, yes, huge yes. Everybody should do some skill work. And everybody probably needs to work on a different skill. So if you identify which is the 1, 2, or 3 that you'd like to work on, put them in before or after your workout 2 or 3 times a week, whatever your body and schedule can tolerate. And skill work doesn't need to be another workout, doesn't need to be profoundly high intensity, it's just practice. Talking about practice. And everybody can use more practice. And so it's a huge yes from me with regards to skill practice. And all of this comes back down to, one of the big things we say at Linchpin is we want smart athletes. That's why we post what we post every Sunday in the private Facebook group, educational articles, things like that. That's why we do these videos, because there's a lot out there, and athlete education reigns supreme. The more that you make yourself a smart, capable athlete, the more you will be able to make better decisions in the gym, and you'll be good to go. So that's it. About 1 hour. Melanie, I'm glad you enjoyed the Allen Iverson reference. It's always, it's always the right call. That's it. Okay. Enjoy, everybody. That was a long one, but hopefully packed with some good information. Enjoy your rest today. They're critical and they're programmed for a reason. And we'll talk later.